Okay, so now that we have talked a little bit about the potential patrons of the sarcophagus, I want to take a closer look at the actual iconography on the side. Um, so as you can see, just looking at this short side of the sarcophagus, it's really heavily decorated. And this is one of the things that you will often see in Hellenistic art is a really saturated level of decoration. So you'll have pretty intense figural scenes, right? That at the very center, the focus of the composition, but then you'll have a frame that is really highly decorated. Here we have egg and dart motif, followed by Greek key. Up above, we have a register of ivy leaves. Excuse me, ivy leaves, and then we have a row of dentals, and then another row of egg and dart motif that is somewhat smaller. And these are all sort of architectural frieze motifs that show up here to frame and sort of pick out these figural scenes that we see. Additionally, you may have noticed that we have not only a sort of rectangular relief panel here, but we also have this gable relief, which calls to mind pediments, right? Pediments of, say, a temple or a structure like that, a sacred structure. Similarly, the egg and darts and the dentals often show up in temple and monumental architecture. Likewise, these acroteria that we see here, which recall those roof structures and acroteria that we often see on temples. So you have a way in which the iconography of the reliefs plays off of a composition that is overall really recalling a religious structure, which makes some sense if we're dealing with a sarcophagus object here. So more specifically, to look at the iconography that we're seeing on this short side, in our gable relief, we have a battle between the Greeks and Persians. And then below, we have a scene of Persians hunting a panther. So we'll zoom in really quickly on that. When I say panther here, a panther is just a term for any sort of unknown big cat in this period. So it may not be a panther in the sense that of the Jungle Book, but rather just a generalized big cat feline. So here we have a Persian groom restraining a horse, hunting dogs. 1, 2, 3, 4 separate Persians who are all sort of attempting to strike down this large big cat that is threatening them. So if you look at this scene, it may bring some things to mind for you. I hope it does. Other hunting scenes that we've seen, for example, the Mycenaean daggers with the lion hunting scenes on them, or even the bull leaping frescoes from Minoan society, where we see these sort of contacts between animals and people, and having the people show a sort of control or an ability to work with these animals or an ability to conquer them as a way of highlighting their own prowess and success. So here we see the Persians, who in much of the Greek art that we've been looking at are often shown as defeated characters, subjugated to Greek betterness. Here we see them sort of in the driver's seat, in control, taking on a wild animal. If we scroll down and look at the pediment here, the gable relief, we have a really interesting composition where we have a Persian on horseback at the very center, flanked on both sides by a Persian soldier and a Greek soldier, and then we have another Persian soldier and another Greek soldier. And in each of these cases, so we have a sort of balanced composition where we have a Greek and a Persian in low stance, a Greek and a Persian in middle stance, and then finally we have a Greek equestrian, a knight basically, in the center in the highest stance. So just bear that sort of Greek versus Persian balanced scene in mind. Think a little bit about maybe the archaic cup that we saw, the red figure Kylex Tondo that we saw in a previous class, where you have a Greek smiting a Persian on his knees, and see if what you think about this sort of difference when we have a patron who's operating within a Phoenician and a Persian background versus one of Greek origin, and how we see these Greco-Persian conflicts playing out. So if I move down onto the opposite short side, here we have the rectangular panel relief representing the king himself, either Abdolonymus or Mazias, and then he is in battle against the Greeks. And then above we have, in the gable relief, Greeks battling against one another, interfactional warfare. Let's look more closely at that. So here we have the king himself, very prominent, actually emerging out from the side of the sarcophagus. The relief is so deep that a lot of the arms and other limbs are in the round. They're fully sculpted, so they're able to reach out into the space. And we have this sense of depth, which is shown by varying depth in the relief itself. So we have this very shallow cape here, which is looped around the shoulder of this man who is much more further out towards us as the viewer. So we have this sense of movement and depth that is being picked out through the quality of the relief. And in the scene full of action, what we're seeing is the king smiting a Greek. So the Greek here we see on the ground in this reclined defensive posture, about to be trampled by a horse. There are holes, once again, like we saw on Trajan's column, in the hands that we would have held metal attachments to have the actual weapons represented by attached pieces of metal. So here we have a Persian fighting a Greek, of sort of an evenly matched combat. We have the Persian king definitely in control, definitely about to be victorious over this Greek. And then finally we have a Greek who seems to be about to smite a Persian over here, who is down on his knees reaching up in distress. So if you think again about the kinds of conflicts that we're seeing presented on this sarcophagus, we have different levels, we have different combinations, different sort of recipes for success and for failure here. Not all Greeks are always going to be presented as winning, and not all Greeks are always going to be presented as conquered here, as losing their battles. And likewise for the Persians, we see sort of differentiation. And if we look at the gable motif of our Greek interfactional warfare, Greeks versus Greeks, here we see just yet another sort of twist on the idea of the Greco-Persian animosity that we've seen so much so far this class. Instead, what we have is a sort of either Phoenician or Persian patron looking at the Greeks and seeing the sort of inter-Greek, Greek-on-Greek violence from an outside perspective, and representing it in concert with a sort of evenly matched Greco-Persian conquest below. So as you're looking at this sarcophagus, sort of thinking about the way that these different scenes interact with one another across the space of the monument, it's really interesting to think about how these cultural conflicts are being represented, and what the nuances are in the way that the artists are showing these battles and other conflicts playing out. So let's look very quickly at the long sides here before I run out of time on the video. Here on the front long side, the most prominent relief that is on the Alexander sarcophagus, we see Alexander defeating the Persians in battle, either at Gaugamela or Issus. I'll return briefly to how we know that's what's going on. And then on the back long side, we have another hunt scene. So we have this sort of breaking up of the surface of the monument of the sarcophagus into a series of hunt scenes and battle scenes, conflict scenes of different sorts against wild animals and against one's human enemies. Now I will pause this video there and return to look in more detail at the long sides in the next.